So let's say we don't have a magic portal to fix this. What would you say in terms of invading Taiwan? What would you say are the Chinese People's Liberation Army's greatest strengths?
Ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. That's their number one. They obviously clearly easily range Taiwan with a significant amount of weaponry, and they can set aside the stuff to range Japan and range Guam, in case we intervene. But they can definitely significantly hammer Taiwan's critical infrastructure and all infrastructure in all sectors.
How much damage do these cruise missiles do?
Enough, on an electrical power grid, on a water station, on a fuel depot. I mean, kind of one of the untold stories. Like Russia's obviously not had, they've executed poorly in Ukraine, and they clearly are no longer a large scale maneuver army. They have, however, launched more than 2,400 cruise and ballistic missile attacks into Ukraine with some levels of success. And the Ukrainians, and I totally support them doing this, don't show us the successes of Russian attacks on air bases, military stowage units, logistics, oil field, things like that, because as part of the information operations campaign, you don't want the Russians to know if they're successful or not. But I mean, Russian and Chinese cruise missiles will be effective in really hammering the critical infrastructure of U.S. allies and partners. They have been in Ukraine. They will be in Taiwan. They would be in Japan if they attack Japan. And they could be against Guam as well if they attack Guam. So that's something we really have to prepare for. And this is not like a Stinger problem, right? An inbound cruise missile or an inbound ballistic missile is not going to be engaged by a Stinger. We really need to find low-cost, short-range air defense systems that are effective. We also need to really emphasize deception techniques. They do a lot of cave work in Taiwan for bunkering that, for placing their aircraft in, and they can fly aircraft off to some of their highways. I mean, there's a lot of resilience in Taiwan. I don't know if it's Ukrainian level resilience, which has been impressive, but there's a lot of resilience in Taiwan. And so that, to me, is going to be the first problem. The second problem is, China. The second opportunity China is going to have is, and it depends on U.S. intervention, but they could reasonably easily quarantine or blockade Taiwan if the only response is Taiwan forces. If the United States gets involved, it gets much harder. But that's gray zone. It's hard for us to say, we're going to start sinking your ships that are blockading. The United States does not like to be the first mover, so to speak, in combat operations, if we can help it. But, when forced to, we have been in the past. So I worry about ballistic missiles. We'd already talked about cyber, but I'd say cyber fits into that as well. And then blockading, quarantining. The problem for them is none of those three are necessarily war-winning strategies. So while we are weakest at combating those, they may not get them the desired result. I will say a quarantine blockade can get to a war-winning strategy pretty quick when people can't eat, or they have significant, the complete loss of GDP. That would have a significant impact. But that might be war-winning for the Chinese. My point on this is the things that the Chinese are good at aren't as quickly war-winning as the other things, which would be an amphibious assault or an airborne assault, which I think would be very challenging for the Chinese.
Yeah, so what kind of brings me into the next question, which is, we talked about the PLA's strengths, but what are their biggest weaknesses?
First is undersea warfare. I think that they would struggle to locate and destroy U.S. submarines. Second is amphibious warfare. They haven't actually built the amphibious fleet that we're traditionally used to seeing. I mean, they're hoping to secure a beachhead with a small number of forces, secure a beachhead, and just kind of flow things on roll-on, roll-off assets. That might not work. That is not a traditional amphibious, forced entry kind of fleet. They don't have that. So first thing's undersea warfare. Second is I don't think they've really built that amphibious structure. On the other hand, it's not a long run, right? It's 80 kilometers across the strait. So, they don't have to go that far, but, they don't have the right, I don't believe they have the right kit to do it right now. Um, we have to be careful saying this, but I'm not sure, at least in comparison to the U.S. forces, that they have the same level of operational expertise, warfighting experience and operational expertise. And so that could play a role in this. They do vis-a-vis the Taiwans. Neither one of them have that, but they don't have it vis-a-vis us. So that could be a detriment, but depends on how the war plays out.
And as far as a scenario where the PLA is actually fighting American forces, I know a lot of people are concerned about China's anti-aircraft carrier missiles or the fact that there are more Chinese Navy ships than there are American Navy ships. How much of a threat do you think that actually is?
Well, I think they're a pretty significant threat to U.S. carrier forces. They'll be risk. But they also, they're a big threat to all our airfields, too. I mean, an airfield's a carrier that doesn't move, right? I mean, at least the carrier's got a chance of creating some deception and targeting challenges that, I'm pretty sure the GPS for Misawa Air Base is known to the Chinese. They got that pretty set. So I worry about all of those. I mean, our aviation strike capability is very important in this, and our aviation support to bombers coming into theater is very important, and that's all at risk. And the carriers are at risk. And, we could lose carriers in this kind of conflict, and we haven't thought a lot about that. But I mean, that's a pretty significant, that's a risk, but I think it's one that we're willing to take. And so, and again, we'll even lose some submarines, I'm sure, to mines or to just, being exposed after they've done a significant attack. But, that's kind of the risk. If we decide to get into this kind of conflict, this will be an unusual war for us in the sense that a lot of forces are at risk immediately.
Do you think that that's been kind of accounted for? Because you mentioned that the Chinese Communist parties, they don't have the same operational experience as U.S. forces, but also how long has it been since the U.S. has fought a war in the Pacific?
No, that's a fair point. I don't think it's been accounted for yet. I don't think it's built into the, I think individual pilots, because they have that risk with every takeoff and landing, especially carrier-based ones. So it's built into their ethos a little more. But for everyone else, I think this will be part of a challenge that we have to prepare our forces for. But I don't. I think that's a fair question. Are we ready for this in the same way? I don't think any country's ready for kind of major air and naval combat. It just hasn't happened in a long time, particularly naval combat. So we'll have to wait. We'll have to wait a little bit on that. We'll have to continue to work that and build that warfighting capacity and spirit into our forces.
Now, one of the challenges we've seen the Russian army face is their poor ability to supply their troops on these forward operations into Ukraine. How is China's capability with respect to if they can land troops on Taiwan beachheads? Can they keep them supplied? Can they keep getting more troops there? Can they keep, can they fuel the tanks?
That's a fantastic question. So, when I think about Russia and Ukraine, I mean, two things are undermined them. One is the lack of empowered NCOs and the turnover of 60% of their people. Set that aside. When we turn over about 10% of our military every year, big differences. Set that aside. The second biggest issue has been this logistics. For us, logistics, the challenge of logistics is always the last mile. How do I get a round into an M1A1 tank forward? How do I get a Sidewinder onto an F-16 at an airfield? For the Russians, it turned out that the logistics challenge was the first mile. Wherever I've been sitting for the last 3 weeks in Belarus or 3 months in Russia, as I left that, I started to have a logistics challenge 8 hours later. As I broke free, I had food problems, water problems, fuel problems, ammo problems, communications problems, everything. And I mean, that was a surprise to us, I think. I certainly had not read anything that led me to believe that would be true. Now, look, now you say, well, the Chinese have in many ways mimicked Russian development, and there's some truth to that. The one place I'd say that the analogy doesn't hold is that while Russia does not have a well-developed commercial, on-time delivery service like Europe and the United States have, China is more like us with that. They have developed the internal logistics. In other words, there are logistics that run their domestic economy in a way, that is more akin to ours than to what happens in Russia. So it's very hard for us to assess. I'm sure there are people immediately taking a look at this right now. Like, what is the logistics capability and capacity of the Chinese forces? Now, one other thing is the Chinese are fighting a home game, and they're not talking about, the air forces. I don't think have an issue. The maritime forces won't. But what you're getting at is when they get a lodgement in Taiwan, are they going to be able to do it? I would say it's an 80-kilometer push, but you're absolutely right. I think, look, if they got a lodgement, I would, if I were the U.S. and Taiwanese Joint Force Commander, I'd immediately destroy any airfield nearby with U.S. strikes. So make them do maritime. Make their roll-on, roll-off, and logistics ships run a gauntlet of U.S. submarines. My answer would be, I don't care if they were going to be good, we'll make them not good. Have LRASMs plowing into that. Those are undefended ships. One LRASM will sink them, but we'll probably hit them with two because that's how we are. But I mean, it'd be I think you've hit on a real risk for them, is that if they go for a lodgement event, they better be able to secure and defend 2 or 3 airfields. And the same problem that the Taiwans have holding off Chinese ballistic and cruise missile attacks on the airfields is the same problem the Chinese, lodgement force will have holding off U.S. attacks on those, Tomahawk attacks onto formerly Taiwan, now Chinese-held airfields. I think they would have a lot of trouble doing this. And I think that one of the positive lessons of Ukraine from us is that, our ability to cut off the adversary's logistics chain, it can be determinative. It certainly was for a self-inflicted determinative problem for Russia and Ukraine.
So how many ground troops does the PLA need to station in Taiwan in order to actually take Taiwan?
So I've done a bunch of unclassified war games recently where there's a lodgement event, right, where they're trying to get that. And they've got to get a lot ashore before it's self-sustaining, before it can hold, defend, and grab more land. And I mean, it's a real challenge for them. I mean, we have to be slow in our decision making. Look, I just described a known flaw with us, but we have to be slow. If we're very slow in our decision making process to support Taiwan, they may be able to get a large lodgement on. But if we're medium speed or fast and responding to the call for assistance, and we're committed to destroying the forces trying to seek lodgement and replenish those forces, then I think that we can create an unwinnable condition for the Chinese.